You lying cheat! How could you, Ethan?
Open the second folder on my phone right now.
Not here, Zainab.
You lying cheat, Zainab said as her voice broke and tears ran down her face. Ethan Blake stood across from her on the altar with his jaw tight and his hands half raised as if he still had control over the situation. Zainab, he started, but she cut him off. Open the second folder on my phone, she said as she held it out toward the guests in the front rows. Open the one with her name and check the dates. Ethan stepped forward and reached for her arm. This is not the place for this, he said. Zainab stepped back before he could touch her. You chose this place, she said. You planned this wedding. You invited my mother from Lagos. You brought me here while lying to me for 14 months. A movement spread through the church as people started reacting. Phones came up in the front rows and whispers followed. Zainab lifted her phone higher so everyone could see it clearly. The woman's name was Sue Jean. The child was 2 years old. The apartment in Mapogu was registered under Ethan's company name. The dates matched his travel records. The insurance documents carried his signature. The photos of the child were stored on his account. The voicemail was still there because he never thought she would check. Zainab had found everything 4 nights ago. She had not confronted him in private. She had not shouted before this moment. She had waited until the wedding because she wanted every lie exposed in front of witnesses. She placed her bouquet of white lilies on the altar step. I am done, she said. She turned and walked down the aisle alone. Her dress caught once on the edge of a pew at row 7, but she did not stop to fix it. She kept walking as every head turned to follow her movement. She reached the heavy church doors and pushed them open. She stepped outside into the sole afternoon air with the sound of traffic around her and the sound of her own breathing in her ears. She pulled out her phone and called the only number she trusted in that city. He picked up on the second ring. Woojin, she said. Her voice softened slightly, not weak but exhausted and steady at the same time. He was cheating. I ended it. I need you to come get me. A pause followed on the line. It was not confusion. It was the sound of someone making a decision immediately. Which church? Yongsan. The one with the... I know it. Don't move. She stood on the steps in her wedding dress and watched traffic pass on the street below. A woman walking a small dog looked up at her. A delivery man on a bicycle slowed, glanced, kept going. The doors behind her opened and Ethan appeared, jacket rumpled now, tie loosened. Zainab, come back inside. We can talk about this somewhere private. She did not answer him. You embarrassed yourself in there. You embarrassed me. She looked at the street. There are 300 people in that room. My colleagues. My family. My mother is in that room, Zainab said. My mother flew from Lagos for this. Your colleagues watched you be exposed as a man who kept a second family in Mapogu for over a year. We are past the part where you get to tell me what was embarrassing. He stepped closer. She did not move. She was not afraid of him. She had simply decided he no longer had access to her attention. The motorcycle arrived before she heard it. That was the thing about Hyun Woojin. He moved fast and without announcement, and you knew he had arrived not by sound but by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. He pulled up at the bottom of the church steps, his bike dark and low and deliberate, and he cut the engine in one motion and swung off with the ease of someone who had been riding since university and had never once dropped it. He came up the steps. He was wearing a dark jacket over a gray shirt, no tie, the top button open. He walked with his hands relaxed at his sides and his face composed, and he looked at Zainab first, fully, taking in the dress and the phone in her hand and the particular steadiness in her expression that told him she had already moved through the worst of it. Then he looked at Ethan. He did not speak to him. He did not introduce himself. He stood between them, not aggressively, not with posturing, simply stood there, solid and unhurried, in the way that certain men occupy space when they have decided something. Ethan's eyes moved between them. Who is this? Woojin held out the spare helmet to Zainab without looking away from Ethan. She took it. Zainab. Ethan's voice tightened. I am talking to you. She is not available. Woojin's voice was quiet. Conversational almost. The words were not a threat. They were simply a statement of fact delivered by someone who had already accounted for the outcome. Go back inside. Ethan stepped forward. This is between. Go back inside. Woojin walked Zainab down the steps with one hand just barely at the small of her back, barely touching but present, a guardrail in human form. He helped her manage the train of the dress as she swung onto the back of the bike. He handed her the second helmet and waited while she secured it. Then he got on in front of her, started the engine and pulled away from the curb. She did not look back. Before we continue with the story, I would like to warmly welcome you to my channel, Soul and Soul Stories by Andra. To everyone returning, welcome back, and to those joining for the first time, I am truly glad you are here. Kindly take a moment to like, subscribe, and become part of our growing storytelling family. And tell me where you are watching from in the comments, because this story is only just beginning. They drove for 20 minutes through the city, and Zainab held on to him with her arms around his waist and her forehead pressed against the back of his jacket, and the silk train of her dress flagged behind them in the wind. She did not think about the church. She did not think about Ethan's face on the steps or the 300 people still sitting in those pews trying to process what had happened. She thought about the road ahead of them and the steadiness of his back against her chest, and the particular relief of being somewhere that felt like safety. He stopped at a small cafe in Itiwan that she recognized. They had been there before years ago when they were both students in America, and she had visited him in Seoul for the first time, and he had taken her everywhere without a plan, just moving through the city the way he moved through everything, with easy confidence and no visible map. Inside the cafe was warm and quiet. He pulled out her chair. He did not make a speech about what had just happened. He ordered for both of them without asking, an Americano for himself, a warm honey latte for her, because he remembered that she did not drink straight coffee in the afternoon, and he sat across the table and waited. She took off the veil. She set it on the empty chair beside her. I found out on Tuesday, she said. He nodded. I checked his travel records against the lease documentation. She turned her phone screen toward him briefly and then set it face down. He filed the apartment under a company name, but the registration address linked back to his personal email. How long? 14 months. She picked up the honey latte when it arrived and wrapped both hands around it. The child is 2. Something moved across Woo Jin's face, but she knew him well enough to see it. He kept a second household for over a year while planning our wedding, she said, and the word wedding sat between them for a moment before she continued. He asked my mother to fly 14 hours. He stood in front of me at that altar and started the ceremony. You waited. I needed every person in that room to understand what kind of man he is before I left. She looked up. Is that cold? My friend Ngozi said it was cold. Woo Jin considered the question with genuine attention. It was strategic and honest. A small exhale left her. Something about the answer was exactly right. She looked down at the table. Then she looked at the dress, which was still pristine, still perfectly constructed, still everything she had wanted when she chose it 6 months ago in a bridal shop in Gangnam with her mother on a video call from Lagos. The dress was not the problem. The dress had done nothing wrong. I need somewhere to stay tonight, she said. I cannot go back to the apartment. You are staying at mine. Woo Jin. It is already decided. She looked at him. He looked back at her with that particular calm that had, over the years, become one of the most familiar things in her life. Not comforting in a soft way, but comforting in the way of a load-bearing wall, something you press against and feel hold. You do not have to explain the rest of it tonight, he said. You can tell me whenever you want to. But you are not going back to that apartment. She nodded once. The relief of it settled into her shoulders. They had met in the most ordinary way possible, which was part of why it had lasted. University of Michigan, 2015. She had been a second-year economics student on an international scholarship from the Nigerian government. He had been a first-year MBA student sent by his father's company to round out a business education before taking a position in the family empire. They had been seated next to each other at an international student orientation event that neither of them wanted to attend. She because she had already met people and considered the event redundant, he because he had already mapped the campus and considered the event a waste of time. The facilitator had asked everyone to introduce themselves to the person beside them. She had turned to him and said, I am Zainab Okoye from Lagos. I study economics and I already know how this event ends. He had looked at her. Hyun Woo Jin Seoul. It ends in 30 minutes with a group photograph that no one requests. 25, she said. It ended in 23 minutes. From that point they became the kind of friends who move fast and deep. The ones who are sharing real opinions within a week, sitting in each other's kitchens within a month, texting at midnight about things that have nothing to do with university by the end of the semester. She taught him things about Lagos that he had never known to ask about. He taught her things about Seoul that she had held only as images from dramas until his words gave them texture and weight. He was precise and private. She was warm and direct. Between the two of them there was almost never silence that felt uncomfortable, and almost never a conversation that felt shallow. The feeling that lived underneath the friendship. Both of them knew it was there. Neither of them named it. She told herself it was because of timing. He was going back to Korea. She had plans that involved neither Korea nor settling into something with a man whose family structure she could already see would require negotiation she was not ready for at 22. He told himself it was because she deserved full attention and he could not offer that from 10,000 kilometers away while rebuilding himself inside his father's corporate world. So they remained friends. Across distance, across time zones, across the years that followed graduation and separated them into the adults they were becoming. They stayed connected in the way of people who matter to each other, not constantly but consistently. A message here. A call on her birthday. A voice note from him when he was traveling through a city and thought she would find it interesting. When she had moved to Seoul for a project manager position with a logistics company 3 years ago, he had been the first person she called. When she had met Ethan at a work event 6 months after arriving and found him charming and easy and uncomplicated, she had told Woo Jin and Woo Jin had listened and said only, "Is he good to you?" She had said yes. He had said, "Good." She had not paid attention at the time to the quality of silence that followed that word. He lived in Hanam-dong in a building that looked modest from the street and revealed itself differently on the inside. High ceilings, dark wood floors, walls that held art she had learned the stories behind over 3 years of visiting. He gave her the guest room without ceremony, found her a clean change of clothes from a bag she kept in his spare closet because she had always left things here, and told her the kitchen was stocked and she should eat. She changed out of the wedding dress with the relief of shedding a second identity. She stood in his kitchen in a loose linen set, dark green, soft, entirely herself, and she made eggs and toast and sat at the kitchen island while he worked at the dining table, laptop open, reading glasses on. They did not talk about Ethan again that night. They did not talk about anything significant. He made tea around 11 and set a cup beside her without comment. She watched a show on her phone with one earbud in. He worked until midnight and then closed his laptop and told her good night. She lay in the guest room and stared at the ceiling and felt, underneath the exhaustion and the residual ache of the day, something she had spent years not examining, that she had been more herself in this apartment in the past 4 hours than she had been in her own home in months. She was 31 years old. She had a career she had built from nothing in a foreign country. She had survived a relationship that had turned out to be built on a year of lies. She was lying in the guest room of a man she had known for 9 years, and the thought that sat clearly and without theatrics in her mind as she fell asleep was, "I have been in the wrong place for a long time." The week that followed was quiet. She went back to the apartment with a bag while Ethan was at work and took everything she needed. Her laptop, her documents, her mother's photographs, the green scarf she had bought in Lagos Market at 17 and had carried through every relocation since. She left the ring on the kitchen counter. She did not write a note. She filed a formal change of address with her office. She spoke to a lawyer about the lease and was told her name was not on it and she had no legal complications. She called her mother that evening. Her mother, who had flown back to Lagos 2 days after the church, had been calling 3 times a day since. "Maichi was telling me something about that man from the beginning," her mother said when Zainab had finished explaining the documentation. "I said it to your aunt. I said it quietly but I said it." "I know, Mama. And where are you now?" "Woo Jin's." Pause. Her mother knew Woo Jin. She had met him twice, once in Ann Arbor during a parent's visit, once in Lagos when Woo Jin had been traveling for business and had stopped to see Zainab and ended up staying for a family dinner where her mother had fed him jollof rice and fried plantain and interrogated him gently about his intentions and then told Zainab afterward, "That one I trust." "How long?" her mother asked. "Until I find my own place." Another pause. "He knows you are welcome to stay as long as you need?" "Yes." "Good." A beat. "Zainab." "Yes." 9 years is a long time to call someone a friend when they ride a motorcycle across the city in 20 minutes and stand between you and a lying man without being asked. "Mama. I am making an observation. I have earned the right." Zainab pressed the phone to her ear and looked out the window at the Han River, lit up silver in the evening. "It is not the right time." "When you are ready," her mother said and let it rest. The right time did not announce itself. It crept in through ordinary moments the way significant things usually do, through dinners where the conversation ran past midnight, through the Saturday morning she borrowed his hoodie and he glanced at her wearing it and then looked away with an expression she had learned to notice, through the afternoon she was working on a presentation and she looked up and found him watching her from across the room with a quality of attention that was different from the attentiveness of friendship. She noticed it. She noticed it and catalogued it and went back to her work and thought about it afterward. One evening in the 4th week she came home from the office to find he had picked up food from a Nigerian restaurant in Itaewon. Jollof rice, fried chicken, plantain, because she had mentioned 2 days ago that she was craving it. He had not mentioned he was going. He had simply done it and set it on the kitchen island with the container still warm, and she stood in the doorway still in her work coat and looked at the food and then at him. He was at the kitchen sink washing a glass, his back to her. "You went to the restaurant," she said. "You mentioned it." "I mentioned it once." He turned slightly. "Was I wrong about what you ordered?" She looked at the containers. Jollof. Fried chicken. The fried plantain. Meat pie. You added meat pie. You always get meat pie when you go yourself and then pretend you did not order it. She set her bag down. Something large and warm was moving through her chest and she let it move and she did not try to categorize it immediately. Wu Jin. He looked at her properly now. Why did you come so fast that day? To the church. The question had been sitting in her for 4 weeks. She had not asked it before because some part of her had not been ready for the answer. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he walked to the island and took one of the containers out of its bag and opened it and set it in front of her stool. Eat first, he said. That is not an answer. Then we will talk. She sat down. She ate the jollof rice and it was exactly right and she thought about her mother's words on the phone and she thought about 9 years and motorcycle rides and the way he had stood at the top of those church steps and looked at Ethan with exactly that particular quality of calm that is more authoritative than any raised voice. When she looked up, he was sitting across from her with his elbows on the island and his hands folded, watching her with an expression she had last seen on his face 9 years ago in Ann Arbor the night before she had flown back to Lagos for the summer, when they had stood in the parking lot of his apartment building and neither of them had said the thing that had been building all semester. I came fast, he said, because I have been waiting for a reason to come. The kitchen was very quiet. Wu Jin. I have known what this is since Michigan. I did not say it because the timing was wrong, then the distance was wrong, then you were with someone. He paused. I am saying it now because you asked. She looked at him for a long time. I was engaged to another man 2 months ago. I know. I am living in your guest room. I know. You could have said this 9 years ago. Yes, he said simply. I could have. I did not. That was a mistake and I am telling you that clearly. She picked up her fork and looked at the plantain and set the fork down again. I need time. I know that too. He stood up. The plantain is better while it is warm. She looked at him. He looked back at her. He went to the living room and opened his laptop and she sat at the island and ate the plantain and stared at the kitchen wall and felt the carefully constructed architecture of her plan for what her life looked like shift at its foundations. Time was the thing Wu Jin gave her. He gave it without negotiation, without pressure, without the low-grade campaign that some men run when they have declared something and are now waiting for the answer. He simply continued being what he had always been, present, consistent, quietly attentive. And the distinction between friendship and something more became the slowest, most gradual dissolve of a border she had ever experienced. She noticed the exact moment she stopped thinking of him in the language of friendship, though she did not say anything immediately. They were walking along the Han River on a Sunday evening in October, 3 weeks after the kitchen conversation. The light was low and orange and he was walking beside her with his hands in his pockets, and she had just said something that made him laugh. Really laugh, not the polite professional version but the full one, head down, shoulders moving. And she looked at him in that unguarded moment and thought with complete clarity, there it is. She reached out and put her hand in his. He looked down at their hands. Then up at her. She kept walking, looking ahead at the river. He adjusted his grip and held her hand properly, and they walked in silence, and the silence was the kind that contains more than any sentence either of them could have constructed. That night she moved from the guest room to his room, and there was nothing physical between them. There never was, and she did not want that yet, and he did not offer it. What existed was the specific intimacy of two people choosing to be near each other without distance. He lay on his side facing her and she lay facing him and they talked until 2 in the morning about things neither of them had told anyone else, and when she finally fell asleep with the lamp still on, he reached over and turned it off with the care of someone trying not to wake a person who has finally, after a very long time, found rest. She was not naive. She knew that what was growing between them existed within a larger world. A world that included his family, his name, and everything that the name Hyun carried in Korean corporate and social circles. She had known about his father for years. Wu Jin spoke of Han Sung-kyu rarely, and when he did it was in the compact, careful language of someone who has learned to contain a large subject in few words. His father was a chaebol patriarch. He had built an empire from his own father's manufacturing base and expanded it through strategic investment, political connection, and an absolute insistence on controlling every significant decision made by every member of his household. He had opinions about who his son would be, what his son would do, and who his son would marry, and those opinions were not suggestions. Wu Jin had come to the US partly for the education and partly for the distance. He had returned to Seoul because the family business required him and because he had some genuine investment in the company's future. But he had returned on terms he had negotiated privately, carving out a degree of autonomy that his father tolerated because Wu Jin was the most competent of his children and Han Sung-kyu was too strategic not to recognize that. But a Nigerian girlfriend was not something Han Sung-kyu had accounted for in his calculations. Wu Jin knew this. He had said it plainly early before anything between them had fully formed. My father will not make this easy. He had said it without apology and without the softening that would have made it a warning she could dismiss. He said it like a fact of geography. Here is this mountain. It is real. It is in the way. I am telling you so you understand the terrain. She had appreciated the honesty. She was not a woman who needed obstacles hidden from her. She had built her entire career in a country that was not her own, in an industry that had not historically prioritized people who looked like her, without pretending the difficulty was not there. She was capable of looking at a mountain and deciding whether she intended to climb it. She decided she did. The first time she met Han Sung-kyu, it was not at a family dinner or a formal introduction. It was in the lobby of the Hyun Group headquarters building, where she had been waiting to meet Woo Jin for lunch. He came through the main doors with 2 aides flanking him and stopped when he saw her. He knew who she was. She understood immediately from the quality of his stillness that he had been told, that this was not surprise but recognition, and that recognition was already being processed through a framework she could see forming in his expression before he had said a word. He was a tall man. He wore a dark suit with a precision that spoke of habit rather than vanity. He had Woo Jin's jaw and his son's quality of stillness, but where Woo Jin's stillness felt like patience, his father's felt like assessment. Zainab Okoye, he said. Her name in his mouth was not a greeting. Chairman Han, she said. My son has spoken of you. He looked at her for a long, unhurried moment in the way of a man who has spent decades looking at things and deciding their value. You are the friend. I was the friend, she said. The situation has developed. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise but a recalibration. I see. He held her gaze another moment. My son has a strong sense of loyalty. It is his best quality and his least manageable one. He tilted his head slightly. I trust you understand that his life carries obligations that exist independent of his personal feelings. I understand that completely, she said. I come from a family with obligations of our own. I would not ask him to abandon his. I would ask that his choices remain his to make. The aides shifted slightly. Han Sung-kyu's expression settled into something unreadable. We will speak again, he said. He moved past her toward the elevators. She stood in the lobby and waited, and Woo Jin arrived 2 minutes later and she told him what had happened, and he was quiet for a moment in the specific way he was quiet when he was calculating. He came here on purpose, Woo Jin said. I thought so. He wanted to see how you handled pressure. She looked at him. How did I do? The corner of his mouth moved. You told the chairman of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that his son's choices are his own to make. In his lobby. Without raising your voice. I thought it was worth stating clearly. It was. He held the door open for her. He will not forget that conversation. The forgetting was not the problem. The remembering was. Han Sung-kyu had a long memory and a longer reach. Over the weeks that followed, Zainab began to feel the edges of that reach. Not dramatically, not with confrontations, but in the specific texture of things that begin to shift in a pattern that feels like coincidence until it no longer does. Her logistics company received a regulatory query that her manager described as unusual. A review of their contract documentation that had been triggered without explanation. Her lease application for a Hanam apartment was delayed twice without cause. A work visa renewal she had submitted was routed to a secondary review desk at an agency that Woo Jin recognized by name. She told him. He listened. His expression went through a sequence she recognized, the quiet at the beginning, the calculation in the middle, the resolution at the end. He is testing boundaries, Woo Jin said. This is how he operates. He does not attack directly. He applies friction. And if the friction does not work? He looked at her. Then he escalates. She sat with that. She was not afraid. She had taken inventory of her situation with the same clarity she had brought to the church steps. This is the shape of the difficulty, these are the assets I have, this is what I am willing to risk. What she felt was not fear but the particular alertness of someone who knows that a larger confrontation is forming just beyond the current horizon. What do? We stay visible, he said. We do not apologize. We do not retreat. And I have a conversation with my father that is long overdue. The conversation happened. She was not present for it. She heard the shape of it afterward through Woo Jin's account, delivered without drama in short factual sentences, and understood from it that lines had been drawn, that his father had not conceded but had pulled back, that the situation was currently balanced in the way of a scale where the weights on both sides are still being placed. Han Jun-suk, Woo Jin's older brother, was a different kind of problem. Where their father operated through systems and pressure, Jun-suk operated through information. He was charming in professional settings and precise in the corporate corridors he shared with Woo Jin, and he had begun quietly, very quietly, feeding information to a financial journalist known for interest in Chable family affairs. Wu Jin's PR team caught it before it became public. They traced the origin of a leaked internal document back to Jun Suk's office through a metadata chain that was sloppy in the way that overconfident people are sloppy. Wu Jin confronted his brother in a conversation that Zainab heard only the end of through a closed door, and the end of it was one long silence followed by Wu Jin's voice, very low, saying something she could not make out but which carried the specific quality of a sentence that does not need to be repeated. His sister, Han Seo-yun, did not leak information. She appeared at Zainab's office. Zainab was coming out of a meeting when she saw her in the lobby. A woman in her late 20s, thin and polished in the sharp way of women who have grown up watching their mothers trade warmth for position. She was wearing a beige coat and she looked at Zainab with the composed expression of someone who has rehearsed what she is about to say. "I thought we should speak without my brother present," Seo-yun said. Zainab assessed her. "Then speak." Seo-yun's composure did not slip. "I want you to understand what you are asking for. Not in the emotional sense. In the practical sense." She kept her voice low. Wu Jin is the central load-bearing figure in our family's corporate structure. Every important relationship in our business ecosystem is mapped to his participation and his reputation. If he formalizes something with you, publicly, permanently, it costs him. Not just with my father. With the board. With the investors who have built models around a very particular set of expectations. "I understand that," Zainab said. "And you are prepared to be the reason for that cost?" The question sat between them. Zainab looked at her. "I am prepared to be the person he chose," she said. "The cost is not mine to manage. It is his. He is aware of it. He has been aware of it since the beginning." Something moved behind Seo-yun's eyes. Not respect exactly, but a reassessment. "You are not what I expected," Seo-yun said. "I know," Zainab said. "Have a good afternoon." She went back to her desk and called Wu Jin and told him his sister had come to her office. He was quiet for one breath. "What did she want?" "She wanted me to understand the cost." "What did you tell her?" "That it is your cost to calculate, not hers." Another silence. Then, "Come to dinner tonight. I will tell you about a conversation I need to have with my father this week." The dinner happened. The conversation with his father happened. What followed was a brief, strange peace, the kind that settles over a conflict when both sides have declared their positions clearly and are now watching to see who moves first. What moved first was not a person. It was an event. Zainab had been taking a late meeting at a cafe near her office when a car pulled up that she did not recognize. Two men got out. They were professional in their movement, not rough, not theatrical, but purposeful in a way that caused the hair on her arms to stand up before she had consciously identified why. She was reaching for her phone when the first man reached her table. "Ms. Okoye," he said. "Please come with us." "I will not," she said clearly. The second man stepped to her left. Not aggressively, but positioned. She picked up her phone and pressed Wu Jin's name. He picked up immediately. "They are at the cafe," she said, standing, keeping her voice level, her eyes on both men. "Two men. I do not know whose." She heard the shift in his breathing. Then, "Stay on the line. Do not go." "I'm not going voluntarily." But voluntary was not the operative word. The first man stepped forward and the phone was taken from her hand and the call was still connected and she heard her own voice become distant as the phone was placed face down on the table, and then she was walked out of the cafe with the precise, practiced efficiency of people who do this without spectacle. She memorized details as they moved. The car color, the plate letters she could see, the direction they turned, the route as it unfolded around her. She kept her face still. She kept her breathing even. She thought about every resource she had, and she thought about Wu Jin who had heard her voice go distant on the call, and she thought about what a man like him does when someone takes the person he loves. She thought, he will come. She thought, I need to stay calm until he does. The place they took her was not violent. It was a house, private, high-walled, somewhere in the outer bounds of the city. She was given a room with a window that looked onto a garden. No phone. No explanation beyond, you will wait here. She was given food she did not eat and water she did. She sat on the bed and went through what she knew and what she needed and what Wu Jin was doing in her absence. She was correct about what he was doing. He came in just under 6 hours. Not alone. He brought 2 people she did not know, but they moved with the efficiency of professionals who had been briefed and were there to do a specific job. The situation was resolved not through violence but through the quiet authority of a man who had spent 6 hours making the precise and correct series of phone calls and who arrived at the front door of the house and knocked and announced himself and was let in because the people holding her were employed by his family and he was, in the end, a figure of authority they could not refuse. She heard his voice in the corridor before she saw him. She stood up. She was still composed. She had held it together for 6 hours and she intended to hold it together for the remainder of the evening. He came through the door and stopped. He looked at her, all of her, quickly, assessing, and then he crossed the room and stood in front of her, close enough that she had to look up at him. She looked up at him. His expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. All the careful composure had been stripped down to something fundamental, something that looked like the aftermath of a fear he had been running on for 6 hours and had not yet finished processing. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." He exhaled. She reached up and put her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her hand, and his hand came up and covered hers, and they stood like that for a moment without speaking. "Your father?" she said. "Yes. He will do this again if the situation does not change. It will not happen again." His voice had a quality that she recognized as finality. "I am going to make that clear." What he made clear in the conversation with his father that happened the next morning and lasted 3 hours was something that could not be unmade. He told his father that he was formalizing his relationship with Zainab Okoye. He told his father that any further interference, in her career, her housing, her immigration status, her physical safety, would result in his complete withdrawal from the family company. He said it without theatrics and without ultimatum phrasing. He said it as a statement of what was true, and he said it looking at his father directly, and Han Sung-kyu sat across from him and listened with the expression of a man who is calculating the cost of what he is hearing against the cost of the alternative. The calculation took a moment. Then his father stood and walked to the window and stood with his back to his son for a long time. Finally he said, "You understand what you are choosing?" "Yes," Woo Jin said. "I have always understood it." The conversation ended without resolution. Han Sung-kyu neither consented nor conceded. He walked out of the room and did not speak to his son for 11 days. On the 12th day Woo Jin said to Zainab, "Come to Nigeria with me." She looked up from her laptop. "I want to see it," he said. "I want to meet your family. And I think some distance from Seoul is correct right now." She considered him. "My mother will feed you until you cannot move. I have been surviving on my housekeeper's cooking for 3 months. I welcome it." She laughed. It was a real laugh, full and sudden, and he watched it happen with an expression she had learned by now to read, the specific quality of satisfaction that moved through his face when she was genuinely happy about something. "When?" she asked. "Next week," he said. "Tell your mother we are coming." Her mother cried at the airport. Not dramatically. Her mother was not a dramatic woman, but the specific contained tears of someone who had been worried for a long time and is now looking at evidence that the worry was not necessary. She held Zainab for a long moment and then she turned to Woo Jin and looked at him in the thorough way she looked at things she was deciding about. He held her gaze without shifting. "You came all this way," her mother said in a tone that was both observation and question. "Yes, ma'am." Her mother made a sound that contained an entire verdict. "Come inside. I have jollof on the stove." The house in Lagos was everything Woo Jin had built an image of over 9 years of her descriptions. The warm light, the sound of a generator cycling in the background, the smell of spice and wood and something savory from the kitchen, the particular texture of Nigerian home life that she had tried to translate into words for years. He moved through it with a genuine attention that she watched from the side. Him picking up objects from the shelf and asking about them, him sitting at the kitchen table while her mother explained the recipe for the pepper soup, him listening with his full focus in the way he gave things his full focus. Her father was more reserved. He sat with Woo Jin in the sitting room and spoke to him about business, about Korea, about the world as he understood it, and Woo Jin answered without performance, just the straightforward voice of a man who respects the person he is speaking to. After an hour, her father stood and said, "You will stay for the week." It was not an invitation. It was the Nigerian patriarch version of acceptance. The week was a gift. It was the first extended stretch of time she had experienced in 2 years where the air did not carry the weight of something about to happen. They went to the market in Yaba together, moving through the crowds and the colors and the sound of vendors, and she translated and he observed and bought a piece of batik fabric for his mother. "For you, Hayrin," he said, because she collects textiles and would appreciate it. They went to the beach and sat in the sand at Tarkwa Bay and she told him things she had held for years and he told her things she had not known, and the ocean was loud and careless around them and the city was far away. One evening they sat on the compound veranda after dinner, her mother and father inside, the night insects loud in the garden, and he looked out at the neighborhood lights and said, "This is what you carry when you are in Seoul. This is the whole world you carry with you." She looked at him. "I understand better now," he said. "Why you fight the way you do. Where it comes from." She was quiet for a moment. "Where does yours come from?" she asked. He thought about it with real attention. "My grandmother," he said. "She ran a small business during a time when women did not run businesses. She was practical and precise and she did not wait for permission." He paused. My father admired her and spent his entire life becoming someone she would not have recognized. She watched his profile. And you? He looked at her. I am trying to become someone she would. The veranda was warm. The night was heavy with jasmine from her mother's garden. She reached across the small distance between their chairs and took his hand. The week was a gift. 11 days of the specific peace that comes not from an absence of difficulty but from the presence of everything real. She watched him become familiar with her world and she loved him for how genuinely he received it. Not as something foreign to be processed, but as something true to be understood. On the 9th day the peace ended. He was on the phone at the back of the market when it happened. She was 3 stalls ahead, bargaining over Ankara fabric, and she heard the quality of the silence behind her change. Not a sound but its absence. She turned and looked and he was gone. She moved toward where he had been standing. His phone was on the ground. A woman nearby had seen. A van, she said. Dark. 3 men. Quick like practice. Zainab picked up his phone with her heart moving at a new frequency. She dialed the last number he had called. His personal aide in Seoul picked up. Someone has taken him, she said. From Lagos. I need everything you have in the next 10 minutes. She was already moving as she spoke. He woke in Seoul. He knew it before he opened his eyes, the particular quality of the air, the specific timbre of the sounds outside. He was in the family residence, in a room he recognized, and his body told him he had been under sedation for longer than a car ride. His father was sitting in the chair across from him. Han Sung-kyu did not greet him. He looked at his son with the expression of a man who has been planning a conversation for weeks and has now arrived at it with complete preparation. You chose her, his father said. Over the company. Over the family. Over every obligation that carries your name. Woo Jin sat up. His head was slow. He kept his expression controlled. I chose both, he said. You removed the choice. I removed the distraction. His father stood. He walked to the window and turned with the manner of a man delivering a final position. You will proceed with the Shin arrangement. The marriage that has been prepared for the last 2 years. You will announce it this week. You will marry in 6 weeks. He paused. If you refuse, the woman will not be safe. I am telling you clearly because I prefer you to choose this without additional events. The room was entirely still. Woo Jin looked at his father. He looked at the man who had built an empire and raised him with the particular love of a patriarch, real in its way, structured around legacy rather than feeling, but real. He looked at his father and understood that the threat was not a performance. I will do it, he said. His father looked at him with what might have been satisfaction or might have been relief. The announcement will go to the press tomorrow, Han Sung-kyu said. You will meet Shin Yuna on Friday. I understand. His father left. Woo Jin sat in the chair for a long time after the door closed. He breathed through the stillness of the room and thought about Zainab in Lagos holding his phone from the ground and the 11 days of peace they had built in her family's home and the way she had looked on the beach with the ocean loud behind her. He thought about his grandmother and the word permission. He picked up the one phone that had not been taken from him, the secondary number that his aide alone had, and he made one call. The call was brief. It contained instructions. It contained a timeline. It contained a plan built in the single window of time he had before his father's people would monitor his movements more closely. He set the phone down. He arranged his expression. He would play his father's game. But he would play it on his own terms. In Lagos, Zainab received no word from Woo Jin for 4 days. The announcement reached her through a news alert on her phone. Hyun Woo Jin, director of Hyun Global Holdings, engaged to Shin Yuna, daughter of Shin Industries chairman. The announcement was accompanied by a photograph, a formal press image, both of them standing at the expected distance of a business arrangement dressed as a romance. She sat on the veranda with the phone in her hands and felt the floor move under her in a way that had nothing to do with the ground. Her mother found her there an hour later. Zainab showed her the screen. Her mother sat down beside her and was quiet. He agreed to this, Zainab said. Her voice was flat. He went back there and he agreed. Or, her mother said carefully, he was brought back there and given no real choice. He had a choice. Zainab. Her mother looked at her. That man stood between you and a lying groom on a church step without being asked. He tracked you to a house in the outer city in 6 hours. Tell me you believe he saw this engagement as a choice. Zainab looked at the announcement photograph again. At the quality of Woo Jin's expression in it, the particular controlled blankness she had learned to read in the 9 years she had known him. His eyes in the photograph had the specific quality of a man who is present in his body and absent in everything else. She looked at that photograph for a long time. Then she put her phone down and said, I need to make some calls. What followed was the most precisely executed 10 days of her life. She called his aide, the one who had answered the phone from Lagos, the one she had heard Wu Jin mention once as the only person in the company he trusted completely. She reached him in Seoul and spoke carefully, and he listened and said at the end, "He told me you would call. He said to tell you, I trust you to know what to do." She sat with that. Then she did what women who have spent their careers surviving in structures designed against them learn to do. She identified every resource available to her, she calculated what was needed, she located the people she trusted, and she built a plan from the materials at hand. Her contacts in the logistics industry had connections she had spent 3 years cultivating, people who moved things and people across distances without ceremony. One of them knew a charter company. One of the charter company's pilots had done exactly this kind of operation before, in a different country for different reasons. The details were workable. She confirmed the wedding date. She confirmed the ceremony location, a garden venue outside Seoul, the kind used for large formal events with open air and wide grounds. She contacted Wu Jin's aide with the time and coordinates. She booked the charter. She packed one bag, kissed her mother's forehead, and told her she would call when it was done. Her mother held her face in both hands and looked at her. "Bring him home," she said. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Shin Yuna arrived in a car with her family. She was composed and beautiful and wore the expression of a woman who understood the exact nature of the arrangement she had entered. Not romance but alliance, the specific kind of union that Chaebol families constructed around strategy rather than feeling. Wu Jin had met her twice. She had assessed him with clear, intelligent eyes and asked him one direct question in their second meeting: "Do you love someone else?" He had told her the truth. She had nodded and said nothing further, and he respected her more for that than for anything else. The garden was immaculate. 300 seats arranged in the white gravel space between sculpted hedgerows, flowers on every surface, a string ensemble arranged at the front. The guests were seated. The families were positioned. The ceremony was beginning. Wu Jin stood at the altar in his formal suit with his expression arranged and his hands still and his father visible in the front row, watching him with the contained satisfaction of a man whose plan is executing cleanly. He was listening for something. He heard it at 2:17. A sound above the music, above the ambient noise of the ceremony, growing from a direction no one was looking. From the north, from the sky, the unmistakable percussion of rotor blades. The string ensemble faltered. Guests looked up. The sound grew louder and the shadow crossed the garden before anyone below had processed what was happening. The helicopter came in low over the north wall of the venue and descended toward the open lawn beside the ceremony space with the efficiency of a pilot who knew exactly where they were landing and why. Guests were on their feet. The ceremony had stopped. The pastor held his book open with both hands and stared upward. Wu Jin did not look up. He was already looking toward the lawn. The helicopter touched down and the side door opened and Zainab stepped out. She was wearing deep green. She had not dressed for a wedding, she had dressed for a mission, and she carried herself accordingly, moving across the lawn with her chin level and her stride even, and the grass caught the hem of her dress, and the rotor wind moved through her hair, and she looked exactly like someone who had calculated every variable and arrived with complete certainty. The guests watched in absolute silence. Wu Jin stepped down from the altar. His father stood from his seat. Wu Jin. He walked past his father's row. He walked through the seated guests who parted without being asked. He walked across the grass toward the woman moving toward him, and when they reached each other she stopped and he stopped, and they stood in the rotor wind with 300 people watching and neither of them said anything for one full moment. "You built a plan?" he said. "I told you once that I come from a family with our own obligations," she said. "One of them is that we do not leave people we love in situations that were designed to trap them." He looked at her. He looked at her in the way he looked at things he had decided, completely, without reservation. "The helicopter is waiting," she said. He took her hand. They walked back across the lawn together. The guests were entirely still. The string ensemble had stopped. Shin Yuna, from her place near the front, watched them go with an expression that held no bitterness, only a kind of recognition. She looked at two people who had already made their choice long before today and felt, perhaps, the particular relief of someone who has been released from an arrangement that was never about her. Han Sung-kyu's voice came from behind them, controlled and cold. "Wu Jin." Wu Jin did not slow. "If you board that aircraft." "I know," Wu Jin said. He did not stop walking. "I have known since Tuesday." They climbed into the helicopter. The door closed. The pilot lifted the aircraft and the garden fell away below them. The white chairs, the flowers, the guests with their heads tilted up, his father's face receding into the crowd, and Seoul expanded in every direction, glittering and indifferent, and Zainab tightened her hand in his and he held it and they did not look down again. They landed at a private airfield outside the city. A car was waiting, arranged by Wu Jin's aide. They drove straight to the airport. Wu Jin made 3 calls in the car, to his aide, to his lawyer, and to his mother. The call to Yu Hei-rin lasted 4 minutes and he said very little but listened carefully, and when he ended the call he was quiet for a moment and then he looked at Zainab. My mother says to take care of each other, he said. She knew. She found out this morning. He paused. She did not warn my father. Zainab looked at him. She is going to be all right, he said. Eventually, they flew to New York. New York was their exhale. They found an apartment in Brooklyn, a third-floor walk-up with good light and a kitchen large enough for real cooking and a window overlooking the kind of neighborhood that minded its own business and asked nothing of its residents except rent. They furnished it slowly with intention. A table that could seat 8, bookshelves they both filled, a plant on the windowsill that she bought from a woman at the Saturday market and that he watered every Thursday without being asked. They were private about their arrival. They told almost no one. Wu Jin worked remotely for 6 weeks, restructuring what he could, delegating what he could not, keeping his corporate relationships functional through the distance while the Seoul situation processed itself. Zainab took a consultancy contract with a New York logistics firm and found that her Korean professional network, relocated to a different context, had a value she had not anticipated. They built routines. Coffee in the morning with the window open and the Brooklyn street noise coming through. Grocery shopping on Saturday, which became a standing disagreement about whether suya spice could be adequately approximated from the available ingredients, which it could not, but the process of attempting it together was its own satisfaction. Long walks through the city on Sunday evenings when neither of them needed to be anywhere and the streets were full of people living lives at their own pace. 3 months after arriving, on a Wednesday that was not marked by anything particular, Wu Jin came home from a meeting and set his jacket on the chair and sat across from her at the table where she was working, and waited until she looked up. I want to marry you, he said. I have wanted that for a long time. I am saying it plainly because I should have said things plainly to you years ago and I am finished with the habit of waiting. She looked at him. She looked at the apartment around them, at the bookshelves and the plant on the windowsill and the jollof spice she kept in the cabinet even in Brooklyn, at all the small evidence of a life they had already built in the way of people who make choices together without announcing them. When? She asked. Something eased in his expression. When you are ready. Tomorrow if you want. I want my mother present. She will be there. I do not want a large ceremony. Neither do I. And I want it to be real. She looked at him carefully. Not just emotionally. I want the legal document. I want it official. Court marriage, he said. Yes. He nodded once. Then we agree. The court marriage happened on a Friday in January. They had 8 people with them. Her mother, who had flown from Lagos and cried the moment she saw the Brooklyn apartment and then pulled herself together and made herself useful by reorganizing the kitchen. Wu Jin's aide from Seoul, who had made the entire operation possible and deserved to be there. 2 of her friends from her Lagos University years who lived in New York now. 2 of Wu Jin's former MBA colleagues who had no interest in chaebol politics and a great deal of interest in the man they had known for 15 years finally doing something that made sense. And Yu Hei-rin. She had called Wu Jin 2 weeks before and asked where he was. He had told her. She had said, I am coming. He had said, Mother? She had said, I am coming. I would like to meet her properly. She arrived on a Thursday and she brought the batik fabric back, not as a gift returned but as something she had framed, the deep red and gold piece from Yaba Market, mounted carefully behind glass. She gave it to Zainab in the living room of the Brooklyn apartment with her hands around Zainab's and her eyes direct and soft. I have been a woman who watched, Yu Hei-rin said. I should have done more than that. I cannot undo what my husband did. I can only be here now and tell you that I see who you are. Zainab held the framed fabric and looked at her. He chose someone worth choosing, Yu Hei-rin said. That is enough for me. The ceremony was at the Brooklyn courthouse on a Friday at 11 in the morning. The registrar was efficient and kind and the room had wood-paneled walls and winter light coming through long windows and the 8 people who were there were exactly the right 8 people. Her mother cried through the entire process and afterward denied having cried at all. Wu Jin's aide shook his hand with both hands clasped and said something in Korean that made Wu Jin glance away briefly. They went for lunch at a Nigerian restaurant in Flatbush afterward, all 10 of them crowded around a table too small for the number of people but right for the feeling, and ate jollof rice and plantain and suya and puff puff, and Yu Hei-rin tried the puff puff with the careful attention of a woman who collects textures, and then reached for a second one, and her mother noticed and slid the plate toward her without a word. Zainab sat at the center of it and watched her 2 mothers pass food to each other across a table in a Brooklyn restaurant in January and felt the particular satisfaction of a life that has arrived somewhere it was always trying to go. The news came from Seoul on a Tuesday in March. Wu Jin was at his desk and she heard his phone ring and then the silence that followed it, the specific quality of his silences that told her something had changed. She came to the doorway. He set the phone down. My father, he said. She came and sat on the edge of the desk beside him. He had a heart attack this morning, Wu Jin said. He died before the hospital. She did not speak immediately. She watched his face and let him have the moment in its full complexity, not grief alone, not relief alone, but the particular thing that happens when a long and difficult relationship is ended by something external and everything unresolved inside it becomes permanent. He stared at the desk for a while. She put her hand on his arm. Are you all right? She asked. He thought about it honestly. I do not know yet, he said. He was my father. He was also the reason I ran a helicopter escape from my own arranged wedding. He paused. I think it will take time to sort out which feeling belongs to which. That is a reasonable answer, she said. He looked at her. The quality of his gaze was the one she knew best, thorough and present and holding more than it needed to say. I have to go back, he said. I know. The company needs someone. If I do not return, Jun-suk will take the position and dismantle everything in 2 years. She nodded. Will you come with me? He asked. She looked at him. She thought about Seoul, the city she had built 3 years of her professional life in, the city where she had stood on a church step in an ivory dress and called the right number, the city where a man had arrived on a motorcycle and stood between her and everything that wanted to make her smaller. Yes, she said. I will come. They arrived in Seoul in April. The company board received Wu Jin with the careful neutrality of people who had watched the helicopter incident from a distance and were now recalculating their positions. The senior director who had blocked his father's governance measure 2 years ago was the first to stand and hold out his hand. Others followed. Han Jun-suk was civil in the way of a man who has understood the new geometry and accepted it. Yoo Hae-rin was elegant in the way of women who have cultivated rather than performed elegance. She was in her early 60s, slim, with soft eyes that observed everything and gave away less than they saw. She received Zainab in the sitting room of the family home, not a formal room but the room where actual family life happened, which Zainab understood was itself a statement. She poured the tea herself. She asked Zainab about Lagos, about her work, about her mother's garden because Wu Jin had mentioned it. She asked with genuine interest, not the performed interest of someone going through expected motions, and Zainab answered with genuine ease. At one point Yoo Hae-rin looked at the batik fabric folded on the small table beside her chair, deep red and gold, abstract patterns from a cloth maker in Yaba Market, and she touched it briefly. He has always known what matters to him, she said quietly. He has spent his life being told that what matters to him is inconvenient. She looked up at Zainab. I have not always had the courage to tell him otherwise. That is my failure. Zainab looked at her steadily. Mothers carry weight that their children often do not understand until much later. Yoo Hae-rin was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he chose well. She said it simply and directly, the way a woman says something when she has already decided it. The business landscape adjusted over the following months. Wu Jin moved through the restructuring with a precise, patient efficiency that characterized everything he did, and Zainab moved through Seoul with the ease of a woman who had stood at the altar of a liar and walked away, survived a kidnapping, run a helicopter rescue operation, and married the right man in a Brooklyn courthouse on a Friday morning. She took on a consulting directorship at a Korean logistics company and within 8 months had reshaped their East Africa trade corridor more efficiently than it had ever been structured. Her reputation preceded her now in Seoul's corporate world in a way that had nothing to do with whose wife she was. They went to Lagos in October and stayed for 3 weeks. Her father, who had been cautious with his approval, sat with Wu Jin on the veranda for 2 evenings in a row and at the end of the second said only, "You did right by her," which was, Zainab knew, the fullest sentence her father had ever offered anyone who was not a member of the family by blood. They had their white wedding on a Thursday, at the small traditional ceremony that her mother had spent 3 months organizing from Lagos and that felt in every detail like both of them, a Nigerian ceremony held in the private garden of the Hannum apartment, with jollof rice and pepper soup in the kitchen and her mother presiding over both with a combination of love and authority that made even Wu Jin's driver tear up slightly. Her mother wore deep indigo. Yoo Hae-rin wore ivory and sat beside Mrs. Okoye at the front table and by the end of the afternoon they were exchanging phone numbers and the photographs from that exchange were, Zainab later said, the most surprising image from the entire day. On a Sunday in November they sat on the Han River walkway where she had first put her hand in his, 2 years ago on an October evening when the light was low and orange and she had watched him laugh with his whole body and known with complete clarity what she had been navigating toward. The river was gray-green in the November light. The city moved around them. I was thinking about the market in Yaba, he said. She looked at him. The batik fabric. The red and gold. He looked at the river. I chose it for my mother but I was thinking of you when I chose it. The colors looked like you. She watched his profile. That is very unlike you, she said. To say something that romantic without it being preceded by a practical statement. I am expanding my range, he said. She laughed. He turned to look at her laughing, and his expression held the satisfaction of a man who has found the thing that matters and intends to keep it. She rested her head on his shoulder. The river moved on below them. Seoul spread itself in every direction, the city they had both chosen and both been changed by, the city that had given them the church steps and the motorcycle and the kidnapping and the helicopter and the particular difficult path that had led them here, to this bench, to this shoulder, to this specific quiet that contained everything it needed to. 3 countries. 3 different kinds of home. Korea for responsibility and legacy, the name he carried and had chosen to carry on his own terms. Nigeria for grounding and identity, the world she had always carried inside her and could now share fully. The United States for the choice that was theirs alone. The courthouse, the 8 people, the jollof rice at a table too small, the 2 mothers passing puff-puff across a plate. She had been 31 years old in an ivory dress on a church step calling the right number, and now she was here, and the distance between those 2 moments was not just time but the full and deliberate life she had refused to live at half its potential. He shifted slightly and pressed his cheek briefly to the top of her head. Not a kiss, just the weight of his face against her hair, the gesture of a man who is exactly where he intended to be, and she closed her eyes for a moment and let the river sound fill everything in. Thank you so much for staying with this story all the way to the end. I'm grateful you were here for this one. If this story reached you, please give it a like and leave a comment right now. I read every single one. I want to know, do you think Zainab revealed the truth too soon at that altar, or was the timing everything? And Woojin, when he agreed to that arranged wedding to protect her life, would you have trusted him the way she eventually did, or would you have walked away? And tell me this, would you have stayed through all of it, the kidnapping, the family war, the helicopter, the Brooklyn courthouse, all of it? Let me know where you are watching from, and if you are not subscribed yet, this is your sign. There are more stories coming and I do not want you to miss a single one. Until next time, take good care of yourself and I will see you in the next story.